After such a magnificent race in Jeddah that ended with Sergio Perez getting his 5th career win, the Mexican driver highly hoped to keep the momentum going at the Australian Grand Prix. After expressing his intentions to win the championship and armed with the team's support, it was the weekend to show everyone that he had what it takes to beat Max Verstappen. He was in an RB19. He was destined for success and there was nothing to stop him. However, what he found in Albert Park was nothing close to what he had expected. So what is it that Perez found in Australia that made him lose all confidence in the car? Stay tuned as we fill you in on all that we know so far. A chain of events from the first practice set the pace for how the rest of the weekend was for Perez. The first practice was chaotic as an outage of GPS data caused a lot of traffic, and the officials eventually red flagged the session, meaning that the teams could hardly gain any insightful data. Rain in the second practice and unexpected traffic for Perez meant reduced time. The third practice was even worse, as the RB19 proved uncooperative. After losing a whole 20 minutes while the mechanics attended to the car, Perez went back on track, where he experienced a couple of lockups in turn 1, 3, and 13, and he found himself in the gravel a few times. His free practice came to an end when he found himself in the gravel. The car had to be changed, and the brake issue experience had to be addressed before qualifying. It was an arduous task for the mechanics, but nothing that was impossible, it seems. They worked endlessly until a few minutes before qualifying. Yes, a few minutes. But all that effort was futile as Perez would lock up once again. And this time there was no reversing the car. On his first flying lap, he found himself deep into turn 3, went across the gravel, and then got stuck in the mud. With no time on the clock, he was looking to start at the back of the grid. As he beached his car, Perez complained to the team that the problem lay in the brakes, the same problem he had experienced in his third practice session. He seemed to blame his car for the incident rather than his own error. After qualifying, the Mexican refused to say what the issue was with his car in front of the TV cameras, making it clear he wasn't in any good mood of any sort. Here's what he had to say. "It was really bad. It was a terrible day. Already in FP3 we have this issue, and we thought we fixed it, but obviously we didn't. I really hope that come tomorrow, race day, we're able to fix it because otherwise it's going to be really difficult to race like this. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't think it's really worth it for us. We have to work together as a team to make sure that we overcome this problem and fix it for tomorrow." When asked his intention for the race, he simply responded, "Minimizing the damage. It's going to be really important to minimize it." The team, however, had different thoughts and felt that the fault lies with Perez. Red Bull's Dr. Helmut Marko refuted Sergio's claims that his apparent braking mistake in qualifying was directly attributable to a reliability problem. Marko shared this with the media. "Maybe it wasn't an optimal setting, but Checo was unsure, impetuous, and it was slippery with cold tires. We had a problem with engine braking in the third practice, but that wasn't there in qualifying. Unfortunately, he just misjudged it. We're not talking about reliability issues, rather detailed settings for engine mapping. It has nothing to do with reliability." Team principal Christian Horner seemed to agree with Marko and said that there were no indications that the brakes were to blame, but rather the whole setup of the car. "We changed a few components in the car, and that may have contributed to it," Perez's qualifying off. "And I think that it didn't sound like there was any recurrence of it in the race, so that's good news. I think that he had a very difficult P3, which was by far from the best preparation, and then obviously he went out and was pushing hard on that first lap. He was late and hard on the brakes into T3, all the bits and pieces together weren't quite perfect. But often these cars aren't," Horner said. When asked to elaborate on the brake balance issue that Perez had mentioned, Horner explained, "It's something that they control in the car. I think we had a bit of the engine running on in P3, but the levels that we saw in qualifying were nothing abnormal." With hardly anything to lose in terms of grid position, Red Bull decided that it would be better to equip Perez's RB19 with a third control electronics unit and an energy store for the season. Since drivers can only use 2 of these parts without getting penalized during the season, Perez would have to start from the pit lane. Amidst the chaos that happened during the race, he managed to recover and move back up to 5th. While he could have done better in Australia, he pulled off several impressive overtakes on the inside and outside of the turns on the track. He also managed to get the fastest lap and was voted driver of the day. For a race that was almost exceptional for Verstappen, it makes some wonder if the fight for the championship is out of reach for Perez. He's second in the championship with a 15-point deficit to the leader, Max. It's not a big gap, but if he truly wants to be a champion, he needs to push harder than he did in Australia. Perez had shared his loss of confidence in the car. And in such a sport where the car is almost an extension of who the drivers are. It was a serious statement to make, which might be the explanation for why Perez is only able to make a recovery to 5th. And if there had been no red flag with 6 laps to go, he might have finished even lower. For an RB19, which the other drivers on the grid have referred to as our rocket, it was an impressive recovery and an excellent damage limitation for the team, but it just wasn't enough. Not enough to convince us that he has what it takes to challenge Verstappen for the title. It was a surprise that even with the DRS, he found it challenging to overtake a number of cars in the midfield. I mean, the car was a second faster than the rest of the grid back in Saudi Arabia, so what was he lacking in Australia? He stated after the race that the car didn't have the usual pace and that it was hard to overtake as most drivers were in a DRS train. Here's what he said. Generally, it was a very good result. Yesterday, I obviously lost a bit of confidence with the car, but we made a lot of changes overnight, so that helped heading into the race. I had a really good restart the first time. I jumped 3 or 4 places, but then it was a bit of a mess with the DRS train. I was frustrated later in the race because I couldn't advance any further, but it was so difficult to get through the field with tire degradation low and everyone going on those hard tires quickly. Maybe if I'd been a bit more aggressive earlier on, I could have finished higher, but I'm happy that we finished P5 and even managed to secure the fastest lap. Overall, this race gives us confidence heading back to Baku in a few weeks, and we look forward to the challenge that brings. He also added this to F1 TV. It was a really bad, very bad weekend. What happened on Saturday is totally unacceptable. We have to get to the bottom of it because I felt that we had a really good weekend up to yesterday. He isn't happy with the team, and I imagine that there's going to be a bunch of uncomfortable talks, you know? But who's to blame? Was Perez at fault for the many incidents experienced, especially at the last practice and qualifying? Or is Red Bull to blame? There is an ongoing speculation that the team might have sabotaged the car to tame Sergio's ambitions and remind him of his place on the team, which would be horrible. And last season it seemed that way. After the Monaco Grand Prix, his performance began to drop, and even with all of the updates made to the car, he never seemed to benefit from any of them, which allowed Max to build a gap, and there was no catching him. To sum it all up, 3 frustrating practice seasons, a disastrous qualifying, and enough for damage control, but not a satisfying race are the reasons why Perez has lost all confidence in the car and is done with the team. It's Easter break, and maybe he'll get his confidence back in one piece and bring his A-game back on. He's not called the king of street circuits for nothing, man, and it remains to be seen how his frustration is going to affect his performance on the track. But it's clear he needs to find a way to work with the team if he wants to achieve his goals. Otherwise, his dreams of becoming a champion may never be realized. Do you think that we're going to see Perez back on the podium in Baku? Let us know in the comments section below. Well guys, that marks the end of our video for today. Make sure to do a quick pit stop at the subscribe button for more amazing F1 content. Until next time, cheers. And for those of you that play Overwatch, because I've been doing it, it's a marvel of engineering, don't you think? The subscribe button is... my turret! Whatever, I'm just doing this because it's fun. Later!